where we add value to them is when they kind of get to a point in what they're doing, from how they interact, how they personalize both
Mm-hmm.
their marketing and communications, and their actual service creation, like how they interact with their customers. When they want to get to a point of being able to personalize that in another level, whether they have a little bit going on as a pilot or a much bigger process,
Mm-hmm.
anytime you want to take like a big stepwise jump in that, there's usually a pretty big technical lift in there.
Okay.
A lot of it, some of it's programming and development, but a lot of it is architecture. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason that becomes important, is, like I said, there's always a compliance issue in there, and usually organizations of this size, from an overhead standpoint, they're fairly lean. They're not software development
Right.
organizations. They
So,
don't have that capability in house, nor should they. Right? It if they're only going to undergo a major project like this every
mm-hmm.
5 to 10 years, it's not worth developing that competence. But
Right.
a lot of times what they need is just really a boost to kind of get them to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
And a group of people who know their business, know their industry vertical, and then also the technical skills to get them there.
Welcome to the OTech Talks podcast, where it's all about working on technologies. You will hear the latest tech information, and your host, Kashif Manzoor, brings together product overviews, how-tos, best practices, tips and tricks, and troubleshooting techniques.
Welcome to the Open Tech Talks, the show where we get deep into the intersection of technology, business, and the future of emerging tech. Today, we are in for a treat, so be ready. If you have ever wondered how community financial institutions can leverage the power of their data, today's guest is the man to listen to. We have with us Richard Edwards, the man behind Mindspan Systems. As CEO, he's been pivotal in helping financial institutions adopt and transform with data driven strategies. Think of it as a turning data gold mines into powerful assets, setting institutions apart in a crowded market and offering personalized experiences that makes us all feel special when we are banking. We will also get into the early career of joining the IBM Watson team to becoming the CEO of Mindspan Systems. Another of my favorite questions is how he hires new talent and what qualities he targets in the ideal candidates. You will get the secrets. Rich's unique experience and expertise lies at the crossroads of data, marketing, and undeniable wave of artificial intelligence in the financial sector. Let's welcome Rich for an open talk. Welcome to Open Tech Talks podcast. And today we have a guest speaker, Rich Edward. He's a CEO of Mindspan Systems. And I would like to welcome Rich on the show. And we will hear from Rich, his experience. He's an industry veteran. And definitely our audiences are going to learn from him. And as the industry is into the AI hype, so we're definitely going to learn a lot from Rich, because what I know, he was even part of, somehow connected with the IBM Watson. So let's hear from Rich Edward. If Rich, you can introduce to audiences.
Sure. Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Glad to be here and kind of share a little bit about my background and kind of what I've learned through the years, now decades. But yeah, so I just a quick background on me. I actually started my career as with an engineering degree, and ended up going in the Army. This was in the U.S. Army. This was in the 1990s. So
Okay.
totally different experience than it's been the past 20 years. But did that for 4 years. I was an engineer officer, and I got out and worked for Alcatel for a couple of years in manufacturing. This was fiber optic cable. So it was
Okay.
largely telecom related, and being in the telecom industry, which, at the time period there, this was 2000, 2001. That was like one great year and then three terrible ones to be in telecommunications at that point, because it was
Mm-hmm.
right in the middle of the dot com blowout. and ended up going back to school. Went to an executive program, got my MBA. We were talking about that before, and then I ended up at IBM, and I was at IBM for actually 13 years, and
Right.
did several different things. I did kind of like the traditional MBA type work, a little bit of M&A, a little bit of like business planning, strategy type work. And then I ended up in the Tivoli business unit, which was
Okay.
largely data center automation. The bellwether, like the majority of what that brand did at the time was there was a massive storage business with it,
Mm-hmm.
and then a fairly large mainframe portfolio. Believe it or not, still relevant even today.
Cool.
And I worked in strategy for a while, and then I ended up being head of product management for the mainframe portfolio.
Okay.
So it was a lot of like large scale data center automation, data center high availability, disaster recovery, business critical type things. And of course, all of those customers are very large financial institutions, trading organizations, big government organizations, that have been around for forever, since
Right.
the 60s when it first rolled out. Which was an interesting perspective, because largely in product management, you're there as kind of like that go between the business requirements of what your customers want, or at least the buyers want, and
Right.
the technical requirements that are going to go into the roadmap. That's the biggest part of the job.
Mm.
So did that for a couple of years. I think it was about 4 years. I was there in Tivoli, and I got tapped to join. This was 2013. Tapped to join a new business unit in what would eventually become IBM Watson,
Right.
which was the artificial intelligence unit. Now, my background, I had no business being there. I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
anything from a machine learning or AI standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
However, I was an old hat at like bringing new products to market within IBM. So it was as
Right.
much this kind of institutional knowledge aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got brought in to kind of help on the product management side, and then ended up drinking from the fire hose, because this is 10 years ago. This was at the very beginning of kind
Beginning of
of
the.
AI coming out of that kind of
Mm-hmm.
second AI winter, as it were,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was an exciting time to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And what I actually worked on, the thing that we were involved in, was called IBM Watson Developer Cloud.
Okay.
And what that was it was allowing our customers to build on top of IBM technology. Because up until that point, there had obviously been the IBM, the whole Jeopardy challenge thing. That
Mm-hmm.
was an insane amount of press and PR. And then there was some knowledge management work that was being done in the healthcare industry. So
Okay.
this was going to be get into, let's go into different verticals, but make it so that our customers can build on top of it. And what we did
Mm-hmm.
was structure it as largely a series of APIs that you could consume and use. And it
Right.
went across the gamut. And at the time, there wasn't, again, we're talking 10 years ago, there
Right.
wasn't a lot out there.
Mm-hmm.
Probably Google was the big player
Right.
because of their involvement in Android. So they
Right.
had like very, very good speech to text and text to speech, because
Mm-hmm.
it was tied into telephony.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but things around like natural language processing, image recognition, um, there were things, but I mean, it was like early days, right? There was
Right.
nothing that you would look at, say, an enterprise level application developer would consume, right? It was not
Right.
consumable
Right.
for them that way. It certainly didn't solve a lot of the reliability and security issues that they had. And so, we were kind of lucky, I guess, in a lot of ways, to kind of come out at the
Mm-hmm.
right time. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that was great. And so, me being the guy with all the background in mainframe and banking and government, I was the guy that would do the kind of pitches to the banks in Wall Street, and
Right.
going to Geneva and London, and all the places where the financial players were, to kind of
Right.
talk about AI and the use cases. So that's what I did for the better part of 4 years.
Right.
Was helping on the product side, but then doing a lot of this kind of outbound kind of evangelism work. I had a great team with me that were able to do. And then I don't think I'm going out on a limb here to say I think there was a big squandered opportunity with IBM, that they kind of lost their way, or at least lost the momentum they had in this space.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of choosing to be more preaching to the choir and playing around the enterprise service business more than anything else. And so
Right.
seeing the writing on the wall, I decided it was time to go.
Okay.
And ended up trying to kind of look for an opportunity that would take advantage of, kind of this experience that I had, this kind of combination of things. And I ended up at eventually Mindspan Systems, and took over the company, actually bought the company from the
Oh,
founder.
okay. Okay.
So I'm the owner operator for the
Right.
business right now. But what was interesting about it was they had the guy who started the company did a great job and had built a great team and a competence around
Mm-hmm.
data, business intelligence, data handling, data
Mm-hmm.
applications in the spaces where data was valuable, particularly regulated data. So there was like
Right.
an existing set of business, particularly in financial services, in banking, and in healthcare. And that just tied in very well with this idea of, where data is valuable,
Mm-hmm.
and, customers that take it, that are, willing to spend on it because either
Right.
it's very valuable from an upside standpoint
True.
or potentially very costly from a liability standpoint and
Mm-hmm.
compliance things. So that's what brought me to Mindspan Systems and kind of how I got here. So anyway, that was not a short version of that story, but
No, 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 I
I'll
think
pause. I'll let you talk. I'm
oh,
taking
no,
over
no,
your whole
no,
show
no,
here.
no,
So
no, no. So we are ended to a Mindspan system. So
yeah,
let's understand in Mindspan systems what you do. I mean, is it okay data company? But what you do? Did you provide services? Do you have product? What do you?
yeah. So we're primarily a professional services company. We have a
Okay.
little bit of asset work that's in there.
Mm,
Some of the things we do around
mm,
customer engagement, but primarily professional services. And
okay.
we're our growth and where we focus is really in banking, particularly community banking, which in the
Okay.
U.S. are banks and credit unions that are below 10 billion in assets. These are
Okay.
smaller organizations, and
Mm-hmm.
where we add value to them is when they kind of get to a point in what they're doing, from how they interact, how they personalize both
Mm-hmm.
their marketing and communications, and their actual service creation, like how they interact with their customers. When they want to get to a point of being able to personalize that in another level, whether they have a little bit going on as a pilot or a much bigger process,
Mm-hmm.
anytime you want to take like a big stepwise jump in that, there's usually a pretty big technical lift in there.
Okay.
A lot of it, some of it's programming and development, but a lot of it is architecture. And
Mm-hmm.
and the reason that becomes important, is, like I said, there's always a compliance issue in there, and usually organizations of this size, from an overhead standpoint, they're fairly lean. They're not software development
Right.
organizations. They
So.
don't have that capability in house, nor should they. Right? It if they're only going to undergo a major project like this every
Mm-hmm.
5 to 10 years, it's not worth developing that competence. But
Right.
a lot of times what they need is just really a boost to kind of get them to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
And a group of people who know their business, know their industry vertical, and then also the technical skills to get them there and recommend which way they're going, and solve all of the internal
Mm-hmm.
conflict that they're going to have inside, from compliance being the big one, but a lot of the change management at an organization this size, like, that's the hard part for them.
Okay.
And so that's what we do, is we kind of help them from that standpoint. And really what we'll do is, in a traditional sense, there's usually like a large project or delivery with it, but
Okay.
you got to wrapper that around with the training, the change management. Sometimes it's a staff augmentation for them, either short
Okay.
term or long term,
Mm-hmm.
or just straight up placement. Like, this is great, I love it. I don't have a single person who can even spell data science, let alone leverage it at any point. Help
Mm-hmm.
me recruit, find somebody, vet them, that they have the skills that we need to take us where we need to go, and put them in. And those,
Wow.
we try to do all of that for them to get them to that next level, and then help them build the capabilities to kind of stay there and take advantage of it.
Right. This reminding me my previous work when I was in a system integrator. So same
Mm-hmm.
way. So you call it a managed
Sure.
services, or you go to customer X and then you take it. Either it could be staffing augmentation or taking over as a managed services contract. I can
Sure.
relate to
Yeah,
your discussion.
and being in the middle of, what is probably going to be a generational shift of workload to the cloud, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you know what that looks like now, and probably how many of your clients you deal with that like do not deal with the cloud at all, have no experience,
True.
no understanding. It's like learning a new programming language, even
Mhm.
from the artifacts of like how things go together. So yeah.
Right, right. And are you linking to tie to some technology vendors or technology, or no, technology agnostic, mainly focus on customers' point of view? So how you build your
Largely
practice?
from the customer's point of view,
Okay,
there's a handful of regular players in
okay.
here. So when you look at banks this size,
Hmm.
one of the interesting things and kind of what is holding back this part of this particular vertical, um, their core banking platforms. You can kind of think
Right,
of this as like ERP for banks, right? They're
right.
they're they're core transactional platforms. For smaller banks, there's basically three providers. They have this oligopoly. 80% of the
Mm,
market is one of three vendors. And one of the biggest complaints about those vendors is how slow they are to add new feature functions, new capabilities, new things that banks this size feel like they need to be competitive.
right,
And so a lot of their core data gets really stuck in a silo.
right.
And they have difficulty just regularly having access to it, let alone being able to leverage it outside of, just the core system itself.
Mm,
So, you know, this is not what we primarily do, but often cloud data warehouse turns out to
mm,
be part of the solutions that we do, right?
right,
And
right.
from a cloud standpoint, I mean, we'll play across the board. You
Okay.
tend to see in finance a little bit more preference towards Microsoft, towards
Mm,
Azure,
mm-hmm.
um, just because they have such an incumbency there,
Right, right.
particularly with SQL Server and SharePoint and along the
Mm-hmm.
lines. But we've done things in AWS and Redshift and GCP and BigQuery.
Mm-hmm.
The big three will play in there
Right,
with them.
right.
Um,
Okay. So
yeah.
now, if we shift this as you're working in a very regulated industry, and that's a
Mhm.
financial sector,
Yeah.
and from a regulation, compliance, and even data point of view. So how you see the shift of this AI from over the last 6 months? I mean, one was before November 2022,
Yeah.
before Chat GPT, or
Sure. Yeah.
and then how you see it now. So if you can maybe give some context to it, so that if someone audience is listening from a financial sector or maybe he's working in it, then that can give them a context that what you
Yeah.
guys are seeing in the market.
Yeah. No, 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 no. Absolutely. I mean, the surefire way to be wrong is to try to predict the future. So, I try to stay away from that, but certainly you can kind of look at the opportunity here.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a tremendous opportunity in looking at least what, ChatGPT, OpenAI has kind of done to open the door to saying, there is another layer of abstraction that can be done
Right.
from not even just like interface, but like from
Mm-hmm.
actually like programming and instructing computers, and the thought of, if we think of technology as just the way things get done, right, as
Right.
opposed to anything more specific than that. um the chat interface of just natural language discussion back and forth chat, with systems, that there's huge potential there, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's growing pains.
Mm-hmm.
It ain't perfect, but there's something there. I think the things that are going to be important, make a difference, probably determine the rate and pace of adoption and where we go, are not going to be technological. Um, you see, one of the weird things, just a little bit of history and a trend, right? One
Right.
of the weird things about AI that you saw that was kind of largely different, maybe you only saw in like the Linux community,
Mm-hmm.
was really the how much the thought leaders and the people that were doing the major work in AI were also committed to open source. You know,
Mm-hmm.
all the big players. I mean, you even look at like the Titans, right? Like Andrew Ng, who,
Mm-hmm.
he was Google and then Baidu, and he's Coursera now, and I think
Right.
like three other things. Hinton, Jeffrey Hinton up in University of Toronto. He was a Google guy in there, and then Jan LeCun
Mm-hmm.
from Facebook, right? Like all these major players, and to a certain extent, Jeff Dean at Google too, right? I'll throw him in there. Um, all of them were committed to both the commercial side of what they did, but then also the educational side, which
Side.
include publishing, right?
Publishing. True.
And that percolated down to everybody else who's been working in this for the
Mm-hmm.
past 10,
True.
20, 30 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what you see is a very fast evolution of the capabilities within the open source community alongside of what is kind of commercially available. And
Right.
there's a whole discussion about open AI, whether or not they're open, and that whole play. Throw that off to
Leave
the
it.
side.
Yeah.
Right. If you just look at the benchmarks of the capabilities today, just looking at like the narrow field of generative AI, there's a good argument to be said that open source is on par from a technological standpoint with, what's closed or what's commercially available. I mean, come at me and fight me, and right in the comments, you can tell me I'm wrong on that. But there's an argument to be made there, which is to say that layer of the technology stack, the kind of algorithmic layer, is not going to be the differentiator. That's not going to be the thing that kind of gets you ahead, right? I firmly believe that it's more about the underlying data. And you
Right.
start to look at things like the beginning of the legal battles that are happening now around training data.
True.
You look at things like the current strike by the Writers Guild of America in Hollywood with producers,
Right.
and the tech companies too, because I think that's probably
True.
who they should be striking against, not necessarily their direct employer. Um, and also things like patent law, right? Like where that's
Mm.
going. It has nothing to do with the technology. It's
True.
all about the source material and the data. And so what I tell my clients and what I talk about as much as I can is understand that the first party data, the data that you have about your
Right.
organization, your market, your customers, how things work, no matter what your competitive level is,
Right.
what you know that you can't get from a Google search or a Bard
Mm.
search or from asking Chat GPT, that is valuable, and it is only going to rapidly appreciate in value.
Mm.
So your ability to like manage that data, which a
Right.
lot of times is, like we talk about compliance, right? Just control, but also leverage it to better serve your customers. That is increasingly going to become what I believe the kind of core of competitiveness, the core of differentiation.
Right.
What data you have and your ability to use that. Um, and it's, like I said, less about the technology layer. And the only thing about the technology layer is it's increasingly going to make it easier, less skill based, less of a technological hurdle for you to do that.
Right.
And the one aspect of this is you just look at like the difference in the size of the base and also the growth rates of data, but particularly unstructured data. And when I say that, I mean like structured data, you can kind of think of like tables and rows, like a
Right.
spreadsheet or a database. Unstructured data is like everything else, right?
Right.
Whether it's JSON or whatever machine generated information you have, or straight up text, right? Think about within your own organization what you have of information that just exists in a PDF, right?
Right.
And how today you're kind of limited to how much you can use that. There's certainly search functions, but it's getting better. It's
Right.
certainly getting better. And you're seeing a lot of these kind of like early adopters around generative API that says, I'm going to create a large language model based on, your set of SOPs
Right.
or how your law firm works or things like that. And then
True.
you can then ask it questions, right?
Mm.
Query it that way. And you begin to see the value around that.
True.
You begin to see bringing in new people in the organization, how much you can delegate away, how you can, potentially save an awful lot of costs around that. But all of that is around accessing this data that nobody else has that you do.
Right. And have you started seeing the customers asking or approaching for these type of use cases, especially the
Oh
financial
yeah.
sector?
No, absolutely. Like I said,
Okay.
one of the bigger
Mm.
things that
Hmm.
we do and we talk about is personalization, right?
Right. Right.
How can I more granularly segment my customers, right?
Mm.
And
Hmm.
the goal is always, segment of one. I just
Right.
talk to you one on one. But to be able to use technology to do that at a higher fidelity level and in a
Hmm.
much more customized level, that I'm talking to you and only you, and what I'm bringing you
Right.
is very relevant to you because I know all of this thing about you, all this other information about you. How
Mm-hmm.
can I use that to serve you better and to
Right.
provide you a level of service you can't get from anybody else, even somebody
Right.
who's many times bigger than I am, because I know you better than they do.
Mm. True. And okay, so now I think this brings me to another question on, as the technology is new and the use cases are coming as a new. So
Mhm.
how you're coping with the talent? Because are there talent available in the market, or do we need to prepare them? And are you facing challenges on it? So how you are coping
Sure.
that?
Yeah. Um, I, I will say I'm usually not when I think about projects and
Mm.
individual solutions we come up with. I'm usually not gated by talent.
Okay.
And that's not because it's not a problem,
Hmm.
but it's more just within our DNA, how we function. Um, we're very flexible, and
Okay.
it's very much assembling a team that is just for this one project. We can bring in the specialists that we need just to do this thing. Um, I'm thinking, like, one example I'm thinking of is
Hmm.
is a customer we worked with. Um, Part of their data stack involved a rather complicated and bespoke integration of their web analytics, right?
Right.
And it was weird and it was funky, and we kind of helped them with some of it before.
Hmm.
And then there was a technology change that they had to do. They were forced to do it. And so we had these core people that kind of understood their product,
Right.
understood what they did, understood their stack, but didn't have this one layer in there that we were going to need to be able to bring in. And so we were able to find a specialist to kind of come in and help and work on this one particular project with this team that they did not
Mm.
normally work with. But
Okay.
we were set up to do that. We were set up to, we were less the team that's been together for years and years and years and have all
Hmm.
this unwritten,
Right.
shorthand for how we work, as opposed to we are set up to work with new people all the time. And
Right.
so how we do project management, how we do planning, how we do team communications,
Hmm.
how we do feedback, all of those things are are are
Mm.
created around the idea of there's going to be somebody new in the room, and we need to
Right.
keep that in mind. And so we're going to over communicate. So, and that sounds kind of like obvious and dumb,
Right.
but it turns out to make a huge difference
Okay.
in how effective the team can be, but then also how much of an insider you can have, somebody who's only going to be there for a short time feels. How
Right.
quickly can you get them to be an effective part of the team, instead of like, well, I'm new here, I'm not really going to say anything, or it's like, no, we need your whole brain on this, and we need it right
Mm.
now. And so we need to eliminate anything, said or unsaid or spoken or unspoken, that's going to be a hindrance to that.
Right.
So
Right. Right. Okay.
that's my longest answer to your question.
No, I got it. Got it.
Yeah.
And what are the, for example, key characteristics you look in the candidates? I mean, you're getting engaged in hiring process,
Mhm.
and as you're working with different customers. So maybe some inputs to the people who want to
Sure.
pursue your career. So from your as a C level, what capabilities or features or characteristics you were
Yeah,
looking
I,
targeting?
I mean, there's always a base level of like
Hmm.
technical ability.
Right.
Like you have to know your job for what you're
Right.
doing.
Hmm.
And a lot of times, and this can be good or bad, but for a lot of the projects that we work on, they're relatively short in time frame.
Okay.
Weeks or months. A few go into years, but
Hmm.
usually weeks or months. which means there's not a lot of immediate growth opportunity. Like I can't take somebody who's never done it before and put them
Right.
on this
Mhm.
team and have them be effective. There's
Mhm.
certainly, adjacent opportunities to work and things like that, but we need somebody who does the thing. You think of it like an American football team, right? Like
Mm.
you have somebody who's just a long snapper. That's all they
Right.
do. They're good. They might play on other special teams, but there's one role that they really know well, and that's what you're bringing them in for. So there's an element to that. But really, we think about it from there's three things we want to make sure everybody does like almost
Mhm.
every day, right? And because we're primarily about data,
Right.
we say to everybody, look, you got to have some insight every day. There's got to be
Mm.
something from working with the client, from
Right.
working with their data, showing them there's something new that you learned. It could be very small, but it's
Mm.
just net new. And so it's
Right.
like finding the insight, but then also communicating that, right? So the
Right.
client goes, oh, aha, I didn't know
Mm.
that. Well, yeah, no, this thing, it only updates every 12 hours. So when you're
Right.
hitting refresh 6 times a day, you're actually looking at stale information. And so,
Mm.
right, stuff like that, like little
Mm.
stuff that seem,
Okay.
but if you do that
Got it.
every day, they're like, man, these guys from Mindspan, every day they're here, I learned something new, right?
Mm.
And that's
Mm.
like a small way that we kind of
Mhm.
like stand out and differentiate. Um, and the other big one is making commitments.
Mm.
So what I need from folks, and one of the things we look for is the ability to make a promise and then keep it, right?
Right.
uh,
Right.
and it's not just the keeping promise, it's making them to move, making commitments, right?
Mm.
Always being like, this is the thing I'm doing for you, this is the most important thing. I
Right.
might have a few other things, but here are the things that I'm committing I'm going to do to you, and I'm getting it done, right? And I'm able to deliver on that. And those are the two bigger ones that
Right.
we tend to focus on, that are really not tied to technical skill,
No.
right?
Right.
That's kind of like the table stakes to get in the door.
And if someone want to go into that direction and he want to pursue his career on primarily could be AI or working as a enterprise architect or data
Mhm.
architect, so and what he should be doing it, any suggestion for him to improve himself for from your eyes, how
Yeah.
you see it.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of those things, like this area, and we're talking about machine learning and AI,
Right.
right? In
Right.
in that in that context, I mean, it is an evolving market, right? It is an evolving space that has new technology, but it's also like, man, like unprecedented in the level of resources that are out there, right?
Right.
So um, you can't wait for somebody to tell you, go learn this thing, right?
Mm.
Go find the thing. You
Right.
do that on your own. Take your own initiative to do it. Particularly if you're looking to make a move, right? If you're on the
Right.
outside in and you're looking to get a job, or get kind of your first gig in there, or you're inside and you're kind of like, hey, I'm working on this thing that isn't really going anywhere. I want to kind of work on the new hot thing
Right.
on your own. Do it.
Mm.
When like I said, when I jumped into that role in Watson, MOOCs were kind of a new thing then, but
Right.
I did take a couple. But the one I found, and this gets back to Andrew Ng, was actually Coursera. He was one of the co-founders there,
Right.
and he had put, and I think the other available one was MIT Open Courseware
Right.
was also available, but he had his Intro to Machine Learning
Right.
course that he taught at Stanford was
Right.
available online, no cost, free, right? It was hard. It was difficult, particularly for somebody who at that point had been out of school for like 20 years to have to
Right.
go back and, bone up on linear algebra.
Right.
But it was accessible and it was there.
Cool.
And I was able to kind of get through it on my own time, and it wasn't really my dime, but on my own time, I was able to get there. And that for me gave me an advantage and helped me, that I could kind of talk to the developers, talk to the researchers that were doing the hard work, and talk their language, right? In
Right.
a credible way that I at least understood it. Even if my skills weren't all there, it gave me a seat at the table and helped me be more effective in my role, and it helped me with clients too, right? Because I was able to kind of talk below the marketing nonsense to go, let's peel this back, right? I'll just say, one of the most effective things I would do when I would go to talk to somebody new about it was pull up a command line, run a command, at shell script to one of the services, and get back the resulting JSON and show it to the engineers, right? Make this call. This is the input. Here's how you handle the token bearing and all that. This is the response you get back. Do you think you could parse that? Yes, I'm very excited in this, right? So I was always like, can I do this within the first 5 or 10 minutes? And then we're at the rob of the races and we're having an interesting conversation.
And I agree to it, because the same course helped me when I started doing it. And the same, the Khan Academy gave me all the knowledge on linear and statistics. So true that I was spending. And then I said, okay, if I am able to pass these one, then okay, I can go ahead and continue my AI or a degree. Otherwise, it's a test for me. So thank you so much. Lovely. I think you gave the correlation for anyone to listen it. So maybe as a concluding question, if someone wants to reach out to you, or where they should reach, or any website or any link.
Pretty much all the socials. Primarily, I'm most active on LinkedIn, so you can look for Rich Edwards, and I'll send you the link. You can put it in the show notes. And my business is Mindspan Systems, and we're mindspaninc.com.
Thank you so much, Rich, joining the OpenTechTalks.tv. And I really appreciate for all the knowledge and tips sharing with the audiences. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the OTech Talks podcast, and be part of Tech Talks at otechtalks.tv. It's a turf to share ideas,